Call your next witness.
Dr. Michael Maher, Your Honor.
Right here.
Raise your right hand, please, sworn in, please.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Have a seat, sir.
Thank you.
You may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Could you please tell us your full name and spell your last name, sir?
Michael Scott Maher, M-A-H-E-R.
And what do you currently do for a living, Dr. Maher?
I'm a physician and psychiatrist licensed to practice medicine in the state of Florida. I have my own practice in Tampa.
How long have you had your own practice?
Since 1973, I'm sorry, 83. 38 years.
Is a portion of your practice forensic in nature?
Yes, it is.
And by that you mean you examine individuals for the purpose of providing opinions in law that are related to law. Is that a fair statement?
That is correct.
Okay. Now, at some point a few years ago, did you become involved in the case State of Florida versus Markeith Loyd?
Yes.
And how was it that you became involved in the Loyd case?
I was contacted by his defense team to evaluate him with regard to that case and the charges in that case.
And you said that case. Which case are you referring to?
The Dixon case.
Okay. Now, were you sent materials regarding the Dixon case?
I was.
Were you also sent materials regarding the murder of Lieutenant Debra Clayton?
Yes.
Did you review all the materials?
Yes.
And that would include the ones regarding Ms. Dixon, correct?
Yes.
And did you also review the materials regarding Ms. Clayton or Lieutenant Clayton?
Yes.
Now, what specifically were you asked to do in regards to your evaluation of Mr. Loyd? In other words, was it narrow in focus or was it more broad?
I was asked to evaluate him with regard, particularly with regard to the Dixon case, and asked to assess his competence to proceed and his state of mind at the time of the incident and other factors which may have been relevant to mitigation with regard to a death sentence.
All right. Now, you concluded that Mr. Loyd was competent, is that right?
Yes.
And can you just give the jury a brief overview of what that means? We haven't heard that term yet.
Sure. Very briefly, the state of Florida has some guideline criteria that they consider to be essential in determining if an individual is competent to proceed in a criminal case. Essentially, those guideline criteria are that they understand the charges, they understand what penalties they might face, they understand that there's an adversary system, somebody working for them, somebody working against them. They have the ability to communicate with their lawyer. They have the ability to behave in a proper manner in court, and they have the ability to testify if called on. Competency also may include other factors. Those are the state mandated guideline criteria, and other factors might include specific factors related to mental health issues.
You also said that you evaluated Mr. Loyd for sanity at the time of the Dixon case, is that right?
Yes.
And what was your overall conclusion as to Mr. Loyd's, whether or not he met the criteria for sanity under Florida law at the time of the Dixon case?
My conclusion was that based on the legal criteria for sanity in the state of Florida, and I want to make it very clear that sanity and insanity are not terms we use in medicine today, but it does have legal meaning that I utilized in evaluating that. And my conclusion was that he was legally sane at the time of those events in the Dixon case.
Do you recall the time frame between the murder of Ms. Dixon and the murder of Lieutenant Clayton?
Not precisely. Best of my recollection, it was several weeks.
Okay. Did there come a time where you and I had a conversation?
Yes.
And was that last Thursday early morning? That would be Thursday, October 28th,
Yes.
Around 6:45 a.m.
That sounds correct to me.
Early,
Yes.
right. And did you and I have a general conversation about Mr. Loyd's state of mind and the evidence that supports his state of mind over the period between the Dixon murder and the Clayton murder?
Yes.
And did you share with me your conclusion regarding Mr. Loyd's sanity at the time of the Dixon murder?
Yes.
And without saying what you said to me, did you describe in general terms how those two offenses would relate in terms of insanity?
In general terms, yes.
Right. In general terms, what relation does your finding of sanity have in the Dixon case to the Clayton case 3 weeks later, regarding the factors present between the two offenses?
The first thing that I would start with, looking at that issue as you pose the question right now, is that he suffered from mental illness, and in considering the legal criteria for sanity in Florida, one has to consider whether a person suffers from mental illness or not, so that's one of the first criteria to consider as a psychiatrist. It was my conclusion that he did suffer from mental illness. That mental illness was of a chronic nature, ongoing nature, so that given that it was my conclusion that he suffered from mental illness at the time of the Dixon events, that he still suffered from that mental illness several weeks later at the time of the killing of the police officer.
Okay, and as to the second problem?
And the second issue is whether that mental illness so affected him that either he didn't know what he was doing or he didn't understand in a very concrete, simplistic, common sense manner that it was wrong. And I evaluated the details of the Dixon case and reached a conclusion regarding that.
Okay, and how would the details of that case be any different than the details surrounding Lieutenant Clayton's murder as you know them from your review of the records?
The insanity criteria are very specific and very particular, as I understand them, to the exact case and the exact circumstances. It is not sufficient simply to say a person is mentally ill and they sometimes get confused. One must, a professional such as myself, must apply those to the exact and particular circumstances, state of mind, truly the moment when the events related to a criminal offense occur. And I made that assessment with regard to the Dixon case. I did not make that assessment with regard to the police officer case.
Did you tell me your belief as to Mr. Loyd's sanity during the Clayton murder when we spoke on the phone last Thursday morning?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Sure. I said, did you tell me
Is your mic on, Mr. Williams?
I'm sorry?
Is your mic on?
Very much. No, it's not. I got caught finally. Sorry, Judge. I said, did you tell me your belief, and I'm using the word belief specifically, as to Mr. Loyd's sanity at the time of the Clayton murder when we spoke on the phone last Thursday morning?
Honestly, I don't remember the exact word that I used. I could answer that. I could respond more fully to that question if you want me to.
Sure, please. Best of your recollection.
Sure. What I recall is that I offered to discuss the general issues of a case of insanity that might include a self-defense insanity hybrid or a combination of those versus a case that did not include a self-defense type of issue or consideration. And I indicated that in the Dixon case, it was my belief that there was an issue related to a possible self-defense insanity combination, but there wasn't such an issue related to the other killing.
And following our conversation, was it your understanding that you were going to be called as a witness for the state of Florida?
Yes,
And you received an email with materials from me last Thursday afternoon. Does that sound right?
I specifically requested a copy of my testimony and deposition in the Dixon case, as I had not reviewed them, and it was years ago.
And then you received communication that you were going to come and testify this afternoon as a state witness.
Yes,
Did you receive a phone call from, well, let me back up. Did you ever email or call me prior to today indicating that circumstances had changed regarding your belief or opinion prior to today?
not prior to today.
But you did receive a phone call from Mr. Lenneman yesterday afternoon, right?
Yes,
And then you called me this afternoon around noon because you wanted to me to know some more specific information.
actually, I called you early in the morning. I
I
don't
was
think you
here.
got the message until
Yes, sir.
noon.
So what was that specific information you wanted to relay to me this morning?
That I had reviewed my deposition and testimony, and also I told you that I had spoken to defense counsel,
You did, yes, sir?
and I wanted to make it abundantly clear, as lawyers sometimes say, that I had reached a conclusion within a reasonable medical certainty that I was prepared to offer in court on the Dixon case, but not on the police officer killing.
So is it your belief that you and I had a miscommunication
On the
Thursday morning?
Yes.
Okay.
Apparently, based on what you told me today, yes.
Okay. And so do you have an opinion currently on Mr. Loyd's sanity at the time that he murdered Lieutenant Clayton?
I haven't evaluated that to the point that I could offer an opinion in court, no.
Specifically as to the second prong?
That's correct.
That's all I have, Judge. Thank you, sir.
Ross, thank you.
Hello, doctor. You are a psychiatrist,
That's correct?
and we have worked together for many years, is that right?
That is correct.
And most of the time, maybe even all the time I bring you in, the cases that we do involve the death penalty. Is that right?
Very frequently, I'm not sure if it's exclusively, but yes.
And besides you, we have other doctors who participate in the case, is that right?
Yes.
Relevant, Your Honor, objection.
Sustained?
Now, you indicated that you had reviewed materials in preparation for your opinion, both involving Dixon and involving Clayton. Is that correct?
Yes.
And those materials include information from other doctors. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So at some point when I hired you, I asked you to go and meet with Mr. Loyd. Is that right?
Yes.
And you have a process of your own that you use to evaluate him. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And that includes a clinical interview,
Yes.
history,
Yes.
records,
Yes.
family members,
Yes.
and in the course of your interview, you made some conclusions about Mr. Loyd, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. What were those conclusions?
That he suffered from a variety of conditions, most prominently a psychotic condition related to delusions, false beliefs that have no basis in reality. Also that he suffered from conditions related to trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder related to childhood and adult experiences. Also that he had a history and pattern of substance abuse and qualified for a substance abuse diagnosis. I also concluded that there was a history of brain damage and a traumatic brain injury diagnosis was appropriate and probably related to the psychotic experiences.
And when you say he had a delusional disorder, can you explain to the jury what a delusional disorder is?
Yes. We all have various beliefs. Some of our beliefs are clear and essentially everyone would accept that they're accurate. I believe that most of the jurors are wearing masks, clear belief. We also have other beliefs that are more subjective and more individualistic. And some of those beliefs might be accurate, some might not be accurate. I might, for example, believe that this is my lucky day and I'm going to buy a lottery ticket and I'm going to win the lottery this afternoon or this week. And that I'm going to win it is unlikely. It's likely that that belief is wrong. A delusional belief is a wrong belief where I'm absolutely certain that it's going to happen. So if I go out and max out all my credit cards and charge even more than I can because I can somehow charge more, put myself at risk because I absolutely believe that I'm going to walk over to that 7-Eleven across the street and buy one ticket and win $1 million, that's a delusion. That's a false belief which has no basis in reality and is just out of this world wrong. Now, there is a gray area between the two, but beliefs that run through a lot of a person's life, contrary to what I've just described, a belief that runs through a lot of person's life is more and wrong and absolutely in contradiction with common sense reality is more likely to be a delusional belief and an indicator of mental illness.
Now, you indicated that you relied on some information from some of the doctors.
Yes.
Did you rely on data from Dr. Sesta?
Yes.
And was that important to you?
Yes, it was of some significance.
Okay. And can you generally just give us what the finding was that you relied on?
Objection calls for hearsay.
Sustained. Rephrase the question, Mr.
Okay.
Wenham.
So when you are considering your diagnosis and your evaluation, you rely on other doctors' findings in some form or fashion. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And you're aware that Dr. Sesta gave the MMPI to
Yes.
the RF? Okay. Are you familiar with that?
I am.
What is it?
It's a psychological test, a very long list of questions that are answered true or false that have been statistically and scientifically studied in order to come up with some conclusions about how people answer that test and how that might be related to diagnoses or other personality characteristics.
And so, what was your determination in terms of the things that Dr. Sesta found in that testing that were important to you?
The MMPI number 2 in particular, that is the second version of it, that's what the 2 means in MMPI. So the MMPI-2 showed patterns that strongly supported the conclusion of the presence of psychosis. There were some other details, but that was the strongest, most significant thing that I considered to be relevant in consulting his findings.
And built into that test is a system of validity that checks to see if people are faking or not faking?
There have been over the years various efforts to determine whether people are honestly trying to answer the test, whether they're confused and not answering the test accurately because they're confused, or other things that might distort the results from a genuine effort to answer the questions honestly and forthrightly. So yes, there have been efforts to develop what are called scales to determine what we would call malingering or faking, confusion, disregard, illiteracy. If you're illiterate and it's not known and you try to do the test, that tends to show up in certain ways. So those scales have been identified, and research has been done to try to utilize them in a consistent and scientific way.
And do those scales of symptom validity include underreporting?
Yes.
Did that happen in Mr. Loyd's case?
Yes.
And so what we're talking about here is, describe what underreporting is.
When a person has certain qualities or characteristics and they're asked about them and they endorse or respond only to some of those, that would be considered underreporting. So if a person, for example, has a problem, a medical problem that causes them stomach cramps, and they report either on an evaluation or to their doctor that they only have stomach cramps a little bit once a month, but actually they have them a lot and they're very painful and they happen every week, that would be underreporting.
Okay. Now, how important is culture to your evaluation?
It's very important. Understanding cultural differences and cultural history is very important to psychiatric evaluation.
And why is it important?
It's important because in psychiatric evaluation, we're always trying to understand the individual in their context, in their family, in their community, in their larger social context, the ethnicity, so on. And people from different racial, ethnic, social backgrounds have different ideas and belief systems. For example, to take something from years ago, there is a pattern among certain people in Appalachia to eat clay when they're pregnant. This sounds kind of silly and maybe crazy to people, but it's a very consistent pattern in certain Appalachian communities that women who are pregnant are inclined to eat clay. It's in their culture. So if a psychiatrist is evaluating a person from that culture and finds that they were pregnant and they were eating clay, that has a very different meaning than if they're from a culture where there's no history or inclination to do that. In the absence of a cultural pattern, that would be a very bizarre symptom. In the presence of a cultural pattern, one would think, well, you know, it's really not good to eat clay when you're pregnant, but it's in their culture, it's something that people in that culture believe, so we have to understand it in that context.
Is it your experience when you deal with someone from a different culture, someone who's black, that you run into some issues because of the cultural difference?
Yes.
And how often does that happen to you?
It happens very regularly. Let me modify my answer, if I may, briefly.
Sure.
Use the word, if someone who's black. That's a distortion, because you have to look way beyond the color of the skin. And there are people who are African American, who would identify themselves as black, who have a very different cultural background than other people who are identified on that superficial racial basis that way. So just to be clear, it's not just black and white. It's much more detailed than that.
Okay. And you said it happens quite often?
Yes, very regularly.
Now, when you got involved in this case, did you have to take that into consideration?
Yes.
Why?
Because Mr. Loyd's background was particularly strongly rooted in a very identifiable and powerful cultural background, which some, not all, African Americans, self-identified blacks, have experience with. So it was very important for me to consider his background, his history with police, his family history, his history with incarceration, which need to be understood in that cultural context.
Now, in the course of any evaluation that you do where there's a cultural component, is trust a factor that, or mistrust a factor that you have to deal with?
Yes.
Why?
Cultures which aren't seen as the predominant or majority or in power culture almost universally have lower levels of trust in authority figures than dominant or majority cultures. So he was from a culture where distrust is of authority figures, of police, of other authority figures, is a strong component.
Was he a significant advocate of the racism that occurred over time and things like that?
Yes.
Okay. Now, when you said, going back to the MMPI 2R, that it reported that Mr. Loyd was underreporting, is that right?
Yes.
That means he wasn't being completely frank about everything. He was holding
Objection
back.
asked and answered.
Sustained.
And Dr. Sesta is white, right?
Yes.
You're white.
Yes.
Dr. Toomer is black.
Yes.
Would Dr. Toomer have a better in with someone like Markeith than perhaps you?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Was Dr. Toomer involved in the first case that involved Ms. Dixon?
Yes.
Dr. Toomer was involved?
Actually, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know if Dr. Toomer was involved.
Have you gone back and read the testimony from the trial?
I read my testimony. I have to acknowledge there is much of that I do not remember.
Okay. Those are all the questions I have, Judge. Thank you.
Redirect.
Yes, Dr. Mayer, did you reach the conclusion that Mr. Loyd was insane at the time of the Dixon murder because you're white?
I'm sorry. I think I got all that, but I want to make absolutely sure I understood your question.
Sure.
I didn't hear it.
I object, Judge. That's a mischaracterization of what I said.
Overruled. He can ask
My
the
question was, did you reach the conclusion that Mr. Loyd was sane at the time of the Dixon murder as a result of your being a white psychiatrist?
No.
Thank you, Judge. That's all I have.
Can I have a
All right.
recross?
No. All right, may this witness be excused? State.
He is excused and released by the state. Yes, Judge.
Defense.
Yes.
All right, thank you, doctor. You're free to go.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, state, call your next witness.
The state calls Dr. Tonia Werner.
What? Okay. All right, I'll take care of it.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. Have a seat, ma'am. You may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Could you please tell us your full name and spell your last name?
My name is Tonia, Tonia, Werner, Werner.
Where are you currently employed, Dr. Werner?
Where am I
Where?
currently employed?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm employed at Meridian Behavioral Health Care. It's a community mental health center in Gainesville, Florida.
What is your title at Meridian?
I am the Chief Medical Officer and Vice President of Medical Services.
What is a community health center? In other words, can you tell us what your organization does for the community?
Yes. So we have a wide variety of services. We have inpatient and outpatient services for psychiatric and substance abuse issues. And we basically provide services for the underinsured and the uninsured individuals in the community.
What are your daily activities in your role as Vice President of Medical Services and the Chief Medical Officer?
So I start my day out on the inpatient unit. We have two inpatient units for psychiatric services, two adult units, one in Lake City and one in Gainesville. And I run the one in Lake City. And so I start my day out seeing patients and treating inpatients.
So would you agree that most days, if not all days that you work, you actually see and treat patients?
Yes, sir. Right now, and probably for the last year, because of the staff shortage, I've worked 7 days a week. So I work Monday through Sunday seeing patients.
You referenced the fact that that Meridian Behavioral serves underserved individuals in the community.
Correct.
Can you give us sort of an understanding of the demographics of the patients that you serve at your health center?
Gosh, we treat everybody. So we have whites, patients, black patients, Asian patients, Latinos. We get some migrant workers that are traveling through Florida that don't even speak English. We take everybody. We do not turn anybody away from our facility. And that's what a community mental health center is for.
So what is the financial situation of most of your patients?
We have a lot of homeless population, a lot of migrant population, so typically lower socioeconomic status.
Now, could you walk us through, getting away from what you do now to how you got there, your educational and professional background until you got to Meridian, please, starting with your degrees?
Yes. So I graduated from the University of South Florida in Tampa with a degree in chemistry. My medical school education was at American University of the Caribbean. I then did, and that was 4 years after college, then I did 4 years of residency at Connecticut Valley Hospital and under the auspices of Yale University in Connecticut. Following that, I came back to Florida in 1998 and did a 1-year fellowship in forensic psychiatry at the University of Florida. And then I stayed on faculty at the University of Florida from 1998 till 2015 when I retired from there. And at that point, I was the vice chairman of the Department of Psychiatry and the chief of the Forensic Institute at the University of Florida.
Now, over the course of this trial, which you're just now joining, but we've been doing for a while, the terms psychologist and psychiatrist have been used. Can you differentiate between those two specialties?
Yes, so a psychologist has a PhD or a doctorate level degree of study, and a psychiatrist, such as myself, has gone to medical school. So I'm actually a medical doctor and can prescribe medications where they cannot.
Are you licensed in the state of Florida?
I am licensed in the state of Florida.
And what do you have to do to become licensed in the state of Florida?
To be licensed in the state of Florida, you have to demonstrate that you have the appropriate education and training. You have to pass background checks.
Do you have any board certifications?
I do.
Can you explain the board certifications you hold to the members of the jury? They've already heard what a board certification is, but if you want to give a brief overview, that's fine.
Yes, so ours is a little different probably. We have, when I took mine, we had oral tests and written tests that we had to pass. So I'm board certified in general psychiatry and also in forensic psychiatry.
Do you have any specializations in neurology?
My board is in, our boards are in, we're certified by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology, so the ABPN. So for psychiatrists, 25% of our written exam is neurology questions, and for neurologists, 25% of their exam is psychiatry questions, so they're kind of intermingled.
And just generally, what is neurology?
Neurology is the science of the nerves, which includes the brain, the spinal column.
In addition to your work at Meridian, do you consult with attorneys in a forensic capacity?
I do.
Can you tell the members of the jury what that portion of your practice looks like?
It's probably about 10% maybe.
Of what you do overall?
Correct.
Right. What types of cases do you work on in the forensic capacity?
I do civil cases and also criminal cases, so a wide variety of cases.
When you're retained in criminal cases, are you retained primarily by one side, the other, or both? If you could explain, please.
It's typically probably I'm more hired by the prosecution and appointed by judges, but I do work with the defense also. So I do have cases with the defense. It's probably 50% prosecution, 20% judge, and 30% public defenders or defense attorneys.
Now, your work in this case, State of Florida versus Markeith Loyd, came at the request of the Office of the State Attorney. Is that right?
That's correct.
And more specifically, we contacted you and asked you to evaluate whether or not Mr. Loyd met the legal criteria for insanity. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
And can you tell the members of the jury how much you charge per hour for your forensic work, please?
Yes, and so I don't charge for it, Meridian does, because I work for them, and they get the money. And for criminal cases, there's a state mandated fee, and I don't know if it's $325 or $350 an hour. They bill for it. I just give them my hours, so.
So that money goes to your facility, not directly to you?
Correct. That's correct.
Can you tell the members of the jury, and you don't need to list every one of them, but even categories of the materials that you reviewed in preparation to reach an opinion in this case?
Yes, so I had a lot of information. I had a lot of depositions, a lot of the police records, statements from different witnesses. I received a stick of information that had Facebook pages on it, some videos of some of the other experts interviewing Mr. Loyd, so just lots of information. Medical records from Department of Corrections.
Did you feel that you had sufficient information and materials, in addition to your interview with Mr. Loyd, which we'll talk about in a moment, to render a complete opinion in this case?
Yes, I rendered an opinion based on all of the information that I reviewed, correct.
And did you in fact conduct an interview or evaluation with Mr. Loyd on September 27th of this year?
Yes, I did.
And was that interview video recorded?
Yes, it was.
Now, I'm telling you that the jurors have already heard about the prongs and a detailed explanation of insanity in Florida, so we're just going to skip right to that part.
Yes, sir.
Can you give us an overview of how you went about determining whether or not Mr. Loyd met the first prong of insanity, which is whether he had a mental illness or disease at the time of this offense?
Yes, so that I came to my conclusion on that based on my interview of him and my review of all of the records and documents that I was provided, and just my years of training, education, and expertise in that matter in formulating a diagnosis.
Did you reference the DSM-5 or use it in any way in reaching your conclusion?
Yes, of course, I did.
You say of course. Why would you say of course in regarding that manual?
Yes, so that's a publication by the American Psychiatric Association, and it's published by them, and it includes all of the diagnoses that we recognize at this time. It changes over time with different editions and different volumes, and we as psychiatrists use that as a way to explain to each other what's going on with our patients.
So did you reach an opinion as to whether or not Mr. Loyd had a mental illness or disease at the time of the murder of Lieutenant Clayton in January of 2017?
Yes.
And what is your opinion regarding whether he had a mental illness or disease?
Yes, so I diagnosed Mr. Loyd with antisocial personality disorder and cannabis use disorder.
Now, is antisocial personality disorder a mental illness or disease?
Yes.
All right, explain that to the members of the jury and how it fits in with insanity.
How it fits in, I'm sorry?
With the first prong of insanity under Florida law.
Yes. Antisocial personality disorder is a disorder. There's a list of different personality disorders, or a variety of them. And it's something that's kind of developed over time in individuals, and it basically is how they think about things and how they process things, and it lends into their behaviors in different situations. Antisocial personality disorder has a lot of...
What's your objection? I'll overrule that.
Go ahead,
That
ma'am. objection, yeah. Go
Well,
ahead.
may I ask a question, Your Honor?
Yes.
Could you tell the members of the jury what the general features of antisocial personality disorder are?
Yes, so there are different features of it, such as aggression, getting into fights, breaking behaviors, limited remorse for victims of crimes, lying, deceitfulness. Those are all characteristics of typically of antisocial personality disorder.
So does antisocial personality disorder, your diagnosis of it, allow you to say that Mr. Loyd meets
first criteria for insanity under Florida law?
The first prong of the insanity defense actually specifically excludes antisocial personality disorder.
So do you believe he meets the first prong of insanity under Florida law?
I do not.
Now, as to the second prong, can you explain to members of the jury how you came about reaching a conclusion or opinion as to whether he met the second prong of insanity under Florida law?
Yes, so when I interviewed Mr. Loyd, I specifically had him spend time and walk through with me his actions and his behaviors leading up to the incident, and then what he did following the incident.
So the first part or possibility is that a person did not know what he was doing or the consequences of his or her actions.
Correct.
What information did you have that guided your decision as to whether Mr. Loyd knew the consequences of his actions on January 9th of 2017?
Yes, so in my interview with him, he was very clear that he understood what he was doing and the consequences of his actions, that if he shot someone, they could be killed. So it was clear that he understood that part. It wasn't that he thought that the officer was an alien. There was no, it was very clear that he understood that he had weapons and that if he shot someone, they could die.
What about the second possibility that even if Mr. Loyd knew the consequences of his actions, that he may not know that it was wrong, what he did? Did you evaluate that, and if so, how?
I did.
Please go ahead.
So a lot of that plays on his actions following the incident, the crime, in that he left the scene, he ran, he explained to me that he was driving down the road, he saw an unmarked car, he saw the unmarked car make a U-turn, so he made evasive actions to avoid the police. He went into an apartment complex, he changed vehicles, he drove through a fence because he was very clear that he did not want to go back out the front of the apartment complex because it was a single entrance and exit, and he knew that the police were there and that he would run into the police. So he drove through a fence in the back to evade, again, getting caught. He went into another apartment complex, he changed his clothes, and then got on a bus and rode away, and then hitchhiked his way to Jacksonville. So he was very clear that he understood that, to me, that what he did was wrong and that they were looking for him. And he was evading them.
Dr. Werner, based on everything you reviewed, do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether or not Markeith Loyd was sane at the time of his offense on January 9th of 2017 under Florida law?
Yes.
And what is your opinion?
My opinion is that he was sane at the time of the crime.
That's all I have, Your Honor. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Werner.
Cross.
Good afternoon, Doctor.
Good afternoon.
Now, you said you do about 50% of your forensics for the prosecution?
In criminal cases at this time, probably, yes.
Okay. And how many death penalty cases do you have right now?
I don't know. I'm not sure, because some of them go on for years, so I don't know how many I have right now that are still going on.
But you have a bunch, right?
I'm sorry?
You have a bunch.
I'm not sure.
Do you have several?
I can think of this one and one other one.
How many death penalty cases have you worked over the years?
A number.
Now, you would agree with me, Doctor, that the evaluation process is an important process in this type of
Is your
situation.
mic on?
It is, Judge. Hello?
Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
You would agree with me that the evaluation process is important in this particular case?
Yes,
And when we're talking about the evaluation process, you mentioned about some of the steps you take, but essentially what you do is you receive a phone call, email from the prosecutor, right?
or defense, or
Okay.
I can be appointed by the judge, correct.
Okay. And the judge you're appointed for what? Competency?
Competency, sanity,
Okay. Under what circumstances are you appointed for sanity by a judge?
I don't recall.
Okay.
I've also been appointed by the governor in death penalty cases.
I read that. I read that you actually were involved when someone was getting ready to be executed. You went up there with some other doctors to make sure that they were competent to be executed before they were executed, right?
Correct. The Florida statutes prohibit the execution of people that are not competent, don't understand the process, correct.
But you were able to find them competent, is that right?
I'm sorry?
You found him competent.
Sustained.
Some of them, yes, some not.
Objection was sustained,
Sorry.
doctor. I'm sorry.
So now, in the course of an evaluation, you get contacted by the party, in this case, it would be the prosecutor that hires you.
That's correct.
And then they provide you a whole bunch of material to review leading up to your ultimate evaluation of an individual like Mr. Werner, all right?
Yes, that's correct.
And I think you mentioned some of the documents that you had reviewed in this case. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay. And so besides reviewing those documents, you want to memorialize what your actions were and what your findings are, right?
yes,
Okay. And in your case, you prepare a report.
correct.
Okay. In this case, it's like 12 or 13 pages. Is that right?
Yes,
And it's important to be accurate in that report, isn't it?
yes,
Because you use that report, in essence, to refresh your memory and to prepare for a hearing like today. Is that right?
I reread it, but I also look at some of the other data that I
Okay.
need to look at, correct.
Do you have in front of you the video conference evaluation transcript?
No,
May I approach the witness, Judge?
You may.
This is the video conference evaluation of Mr. Loyd done by you September 27, 2021.
thank you.
You're going to need it. All right. You do an interview of Mr. Loyd in that video conference, do you not?
Yes,
And this one lasted about 2 hours, is that right?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And then you memorialize in your report some of the things that you guys talked about, correct?
Correct,
Some of the answers he gave you,
yes.
correct? Now, you have background information, right?
Yes,
But I don't notice anything that you put in your report about him dealing with racism. Is that right?
correct.
He told you he'd watch racial movies like Roots, Mississippi Burning, Rosewood. Is that right?
I don't recall him telling me that, but I do recall him telling that I've read or saw him telling other examiners that.
Why don't you look on page 11, see if that refreshes your memory.
Yes,
So he told you that he watched movies like Roots, Mississippi Burning, right?
yes, correct.
about people hanging from the trees, which he identified as true life, right?
Correct.
Burning
I'm
down-
sorry, where is that on here?
Line 15 through 17?
Correct.
Burning our houses down.
Calls for hearsay.
Sustained,
It's not hearsay, Judge.
sustained.
And he said, which is an easy mistake to make, that he was making...
Objection calls, just reading hearsay in the record.
I'm not reading
He
hearsay.
hasn't, stop. Ask the question, don't answer anything. What's the question?
Okay, the
Don't-
question is, did he tell you he was making $1,000 a day?
You can answer that, doctor.
I don't recall specifically.
Okay, would anything refresh your recollection?
If you want to point me to the page, I'm happy to look at it.
Page 21. Lines 15 through 17.
Correct. He said when he was working at Texas Chicken that he was making $1,000 a week.
But you heard that he was making $1,000 a night, right?
I don't know if I heard that or if that's a typographical error.
You don't know if you heard it or it's a typographical error?
Correct.
Okay. So in your report, you put $1,000 a night, correct?
I'm not sure if you want to refer me to that page. I'm happy to look at
Page
it.
3 of 12, under employment history.
What it says is he stated he could make $1,000 on the night shift. It doesn't say per day or per week.
Okay. He told you that he was with Trinica Hobbs for 4 years on the streets, meaning he was out of prison, correct? Page 24.
'24 of the transcript.
Yeah, 24 of the
Sorry, I was
transcript.
looking at my report.
Lines 8 through 11.
Yes, on the streets, 4 years, and my time lockup on and off. She would be on and off because I was in prison.
Well, you didn't put in your report that was 4 years on the street, correct?
I wrote, he was in a relationship with Trinica Hobbs for 4 years, beginning in the late 1990s, period. He described the relationship as on and off while I was incarcerated.
Okay, so you didn't put down the correct answer he gave you, which was he was in this relationship for 4 years on the streets.
Correct, I did not put on the streets in my report.
Okay. you wrote that he reported being beaten at 15 years. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, what page are you referring to?
Page 4. We're going in chronological order, just so you
Okay.
know.
Yes,
But he actually told you that he was 16, 17, 15, I can't remember the year, correct? That's
I
on
don't
pa-
recall.
Page 25, see if you can refresh your recollection.
Yeah.
Page 29, lines.
Oh, I thought you said 25, sorry, I
I'm
wasn't
sorry, I
seeing
may
it.
have said 25. Page 29, lines 15 through 17.
Thank you. When were you kidnapped? I want to say I was 16, 17, 15, I can't remember the year.
And you just put 15.
Correct, I did.
You said in your report that he denied any history of loss of consciousness. Is that correct? Consciousness.
That's correct.
Okay. But he told you that he was knocked on the head unconscious. Isn't that true?
I'm sorry, refer me to the page?
31, lines 11 through 13.
Right, and I think later on, if I remember that correct, he said that he did not fall down, which would indicate that he didn't lose consciousness.
So you decided to, even though he told you, to omit that from your report.
No, sir, on page 32, line 6, so they called themselves junkmen, they hit me with the skate first, and I said, and it knocked you out? No. Basically, I guess you could say I was out on my feet. So that's not a loss of consciousness.
Well, you asked him a specific question, did you not?
Yes,
And
and
he
then
responded yes.
at one point, he responded yes, and then he clarified it further, that it was a no.
And you decided not to include that in your report.
Correct, because he clarified it that it was a no, that he did not get knocked out.
Do you cherry pick what you put in your report?
No, sir, I do not cherry pick what I put in my report.
And isn't it true that you put in your report under psychiatric history,
Sustained.
did you ever say that Markeith Loyd told you that the staff reported when he was hospitalized at Laurel Oaks, they don't see anything wrong with him?
Yes, I did.
And isn't it true that in the evaluation you did with him, he told you that they said they think I'm crazy? I'm referring to page 35, lines 16 through 19.
Yes, he stated that in a family meeting, that they told his mom some things about him. They think I'm crazy and I need long-term.
Okay? And that wasn't included in your report, right?
Correct. I'm sorry, it is. He recalled a family meeting where his mother was told he needed quote-unquote, needed long-term treatment. He recalled he was angry and threw charts.
But that's not what he says. He says they think I was crazy. Isn't that right?
Yes, in the transcript, it says that, yes.
So you decide the way you want to put something in your report. Is that right?
No, I mean, it's important to understand, I don't have this transcript when I'm writing my report. When I do the interview, I'm taking notes, and then I write my report from my notes. So I don't have word for word what he said, the way that we're going through it now when I'm writing my report. I have notes that I'm writing as fast as I can for 2 hours while I talk to him and interview him.
And isn't it true the reason that they're not used to that is because they don't videotape you that often?
That's not true. I'm videotaped quite often up in Alachua County in Gainesville.
And do you know why they videotape you?
Sustained.
He told you that I believe in the higher power.
Objection.
Sustained.
Isn't it true, Markeith Loyd conveyed to you that
Objection, Judge.
Sustained.
did Markeith Loyd ever say to you,
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
he told you that he was probably 8?
Objection.
Sustained.
May I come sidebar, Judge?
You can. You may proceed, Mr. Loyd.
Thank you, Judge. did you have conversations with Mr. Loyd about the incident leading up to his arrest involving Sade Dixon?
I did.
And you stated that, did you state something in the first paragraph of the incident leading up to his arrest about when he pulled the gun?
With regards to the incident with Miss Dixon, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, it's in the first paragraph, the last sentence, actually the last two, page 7 of 12.
Yes.
And isn't it true that that's not what he told you?
I don't recall specifically. I'm happy to review it if you tell me what page it's on.
Page 59 through 60. And so we're clear on this. You wrote that he stated he then pulled out his gun. Her brother came out of the home and attacked him. He shot both of them in self-defense. So I'm particularly interested how you characterize her brother coming out of the home after he already has his gun out.
Okay.
Do you see that?
Yes. Yes, so on page 59, it says, she comes out, we're talking about what we're going through.
What line are you on?
I'm sorry, line 18.
Okay.
And she ends up asking me about my exes, and I tell her I just had sex with one of my exes, and she goes back in the house and gets a gun and comes out and calls me to the side of the house, to the back side of the house. I come over, she has a gun, so I pull out my gun. I'm
Okay.
like, Sade, what you gonna do? Parts are missing, I'm just trying to make it short. That's okay. I'm just telling the relevant parts far as,
Judge, I would object at this point.
Sustain.
She doesn't say, isn't it true that it's never in the interview that he says that he pulled out the gun before her brother came out?
it is, sir. The very next line is, anyway, her brother comes out and his account is different, but anyway, he attacks me and whatever, and our ship blows up.
Where do you see that he still had the gun out?
He never said that he put it away.
Okay.
So I'm just saying he had the gun out, and then the brother comes out and attacks him. He never
Okay.
told me that he put the gun back away.
Okay, so he didn't tell you put the gun back away, but you've had an opportunity, of course, to look at all the Dixon material, the police reports, statements given by him, statements given by Ronald Stewart. You had all that to review, right?
That's correct.
Okay, but nevertheless, you tell your own version.
No, sir, I told the version that he told me here, and he said he was trying to make it short. I told what he told me. That case was not the crux of the opinion that I was asked to formulate.
Okay. Okay, did you ever describe the issue of the news reports?
Objection, Your Honor. There's been no
Sustain.
testimony.
Did Mr. Loyd ever say to you that,
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
you said you had conversations with Mr. Loyd as part of your evaluated process?
Yes, I interviewed him.
And did you ever talk to him about, you don't have to tell me what it is, I'm just asking the question. Did you ever talk to him where he said that the police were setting the
Objection.
Sustained.
Did Mr. Loyd ever talk to you about him wearing a bulletproof vest?
Yes, he did.
Did he tell you that he wanted to see if it worked?
Yes, he described that.
And did he tell you that, did he talk to you about?
Objection, hearsay.
Sustained.
What did he talk to you about his prayers being answered by God?
Objection, hearsay.
Sustained.
I'm asking a question, it's not hearsay, Judge.
Yes, it is. Sustained.
All right, doctor. When you evaluated him, you knew how important it was to take into consideration culture. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And it's your belief that you did take in culture, correct?
Yes.
What things did you do to take in culture?
So we're trained as psychiatrists and to take in social diversity. So it has to do with religion, race, background, where they were raised, socioeconomic status. So all of that is taken into consideration. And it's difficult, but it doesn't necessarily play into the question of sanity at the time of the crime.
So it's your testimony that culture does not play into the determination by you of insanity at the time of the event?
Sometimes it does. In this instance, it did not play into whether he appreciated the wrongfulness of his actions and understood what he was doing.
Well, before you get to the wrongfulness, you have to get to whether he is mentally ill or has a mental defect, right?
That's correct, and I did.
Okay. So besides this little area, which obviously is an important area where you're making that decision, you have all of his life before, correct?
That's correct.
And then you have what happened afterwards, correct?
That's correct.
And so it's super taking culture on the before, isn't it?
It's equally important, correct? Yes,
As well as the after. Is that correct?
that's correct.
So in reality, culture is important.
Yes,
Now, you said you work at a clinic. That's a full-time job, right?
that is.
And so is this something you moonlight in?
No, sir.
You do this as part of your job for the clinic?
That's correct.
Okay, and I heard you said you don't get paid. They take all the money.
Correct. They do the billing, correct.
You
Yes,
don't
it
get-
goes to them.
You don't get any rewards for that.
Correct.
It's part of your salary.
Yes.
If I can have a moment, Judge?
Yes, sir.
Anything else? I'm done, Judge. I need to make an objection.
Okay, let me just do this. State, do you have any, are you going to have any redirect?
We do not, Your
All
Honor.
right, then let me see the attorneys at the bench. May this witness be excused, state? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. May this witness be excused.
She may, Your Honor.
Mr. Lineman? Yes. Thank you, doctor. You are free to go.
Thank you, Your Honor.
State, call your next witness.
Rebuttal case.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I kept you a little late because I knew this was the last witness, all right? All of the testimony and evidence in this phase of the trial has now been received. I'm going to send you all to the hotel tomorrow. There will be jury instructions, closing arguments, and we will hand the case to the jury for verdict. We're going to start somewhere between 9:30 and 10. I have a couple of issues I need to resolve, so I don't know exactly when we're going to start, but you will get the case tomorrow. Juror 642, is there anyone who can help you this evening and bring? Tomorrow's when it can be picked up? What time does the pharmacy open? And what time does the pharmacy close? And what, don't tell me the address, just tell me what part of town it's in. West, north, south? You want to just write it down and give me that? All right. All right, if you'll give that to the deputies, I'll work on this, ma'am, and we'll get it resolved for you. Have a good evening, folks. We'll see you tomorrow morning, somewhere between 9:30 and 10. I need to talk to the lawyers for a little bit, but I want you to get to the hotel so you can get your dinner. Did you read it? All right, I'll talk to you guys when I'm done with this. Okay. Mr. Lineman, you have a motion?
Yes, Judge. This time,
I can't hear you. You got to turn your mic on.
at this time, Judge, the defense would move for a judgment of acquittal in the light most favorable to the defense. We renew all prior objections. We don't believe that the evidence supports premeditation in this case, and I'm citing the case of Fowler versus State, 921 Southern 2nd, 708. that the state did not carry its burden to rebut defendant's prima facie case of self-defense.
Anything else?
No.
Response, state?
Well, the issue of premeditation is, generally speaking, a question for the jury. I'm unaware of any evidence or facts that would make it not such in this situation. While the defendant may have testified that this was self-defense, the video alone regarding the actions of Lieutenant Clayton and the testimony regarding her use of force make that a jury question and not a question for the court to direct the verdict one way or the other. I'm happy to look at
I think
the
your
case.
mic's off again.
Nope, it's on this time.
I can't hear you.
It's just late,
Yeah.
Judge, that's all it
Okay.
is. I said I'm happy to look at the case law that defense counsel cited, but I'm unaware of any law that would lead this court to direct the verdict on the issue of self-defense based upon the evidence that's been provided to this point.
Mr. Linneman, you get the last word if you want it, because it's your, no. All right, court's heard all the testimony in this case. I believe the state has met their burden sufficient to go to the jury. Intent, premeditation, all of that. Premeditation are jury questions. There is sufficient evidence from the video where the jury could find that it was a premeditated killing. So motion for JOA on all counts is denied, and the court's ruling as to the court having met their burden on all count is on all counts. All right, jury instructions, gentlemen. We need to go through these if we intend to turn this over to the defense, or I'm sorry, to the jury tomorrow morning. Why don't we take a quick 10-minute break and then come back and go through these jury instructions? Is there a lot of controversy? I know you guys were going to talk, and I got the updated ones from you, Mr. Buxman.
I think the only controversy would be the heat of passion and self-defense instruction, and whether they want the NGI on the verdict form of all.
Okay, that's what I thought we were going to end up talking about. Has any change been made to the heat of passion or your requested justifiable use of deadly force instruction? Okay. Yeah, but this has all kinds of stand your ground, which he's not entitled to. He's a convicted felon. That all has to come out. All right, take a 10-minute break, folks. Let me try and resolve this jury issue, and I'll be back. Thanks.